Come with me. A lonely CEO found a shivering nurse with a baby at a bus stop, then took her home. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night wind whipped through the empty streets, carrying flakes of snow that glowed under the flickering light of the bus stop. The city was quiet, the kind of silence that made every sound echo a little longer. A sleek black car slowed near the curb, its engine humming softly. Inside sat Ethan Blake, the 35-year-old CEO of Blake Biomedical, a man once known for brilliance, now known for silence. He had not smiled in 2 years, not since his wife passed away from an illness his own company had failed to cure. He rubbed a tired hand over his face, staring blankly at the snow. He was on his way back from a late board meeting that had gone exactly as expected: cold words, colder decisions. But then, through the blur of falling snow, he saw her. A young woman stood under the bus stop shelter, holding a small baby wrapped in a thin blanket. Her scrubs were soaked, her hair clung to her cheeks, and her shoulders shook with every gust of wind. The baby whimpered softly, a tiny sound that cut through the storm. Ethan frowned. At this hour, in this cold, what kind of nurse was standing here with an infant? He watched for a moment, expecting someone to stop, to help. But no one did. The street was deserted. The woman tried to calm the baby, whispering through trembling lips. Her hands were bare, red from the cold. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He could have driven away, he almost did. But something deep inside him, the part that still remembered what compassion felt like, refused. He pulled over. The car door opened with a soft click, and cold air rushed in. The woman startled, clutching her child protectively. Ethan approached slowly, his breath fogging in the air. "Miss," he said, his voice low but steady. "You cannot stay out here. It is below freezing." Her eyes lifted to his, wide and wary. "I will be fine," she whispered. "The bus will come soon." Ethan glanced down the road. There was no bus in sight, only snow piling higher. "No," he said quietly. "You will not be fine." He took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The fabric swallowed her small frame. "Come with me," he said simply. The nurse hesitated, eyes darting between the stranger and her sleeping baby. The man's face looked stern, but his eyes were kind, tired, but kind. She nodded, too cold and too desperate to refuse. Ethan opened the car door for her. As she stepped inside, the warmth made her shiver even harder. The baby stirred, but did not cry. Ethan drove slowly through the snow, the headlights carving pale paths of light through the darkness. "I am Ethan," he said after a moment. "What is your name?" "Mia," she whispered. "Mia Collins. And this is Noel." He nodded. "Your baby?" "Yes," she said softly, glancing down. "He is 2 months old." The car grew quiet again, filled only with the steady rhythm of the heater and the faint hum of tires against wet pavement. Ethan stole a glance at her. Her eyes were half closed from exhaustion, but there was something unbreakable in her face, a quiet strength. When they reached the long driveway of his estate, the iron gates opened automatically. Mia stared through the window, her breath fogging the glass. "I cannot stay here," she said, almost to herself. "This looks like someone else's world." Ethan parked the car and turned to her. "Tonight, this world has room for you," he said gently. Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. She looked at the baby, then at the man who had stopped when no one else did. Finally, she nodded. Inside the house, warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Ethan led her to the guest room near the fire. "There are clean towels in the bathroom," he said quietly. "I will bring some food." When he turned to leave, Mia's voice stopped him. "Thank you," she said, her tone trembling but sincere. "You did not have to stop." Ethan paused at the doorway. "Neither did you," he said. "You could have said no." Their eyes met for a fleeting second, two strangers bound by the same loneliness. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, as if trying to cover every scar the night had left behind. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, melting the frost that had clung to the glass overnight. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of movement from the guest room. Ethan Blake stood at the kitchen counter, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. He was still not sure why he had brought a stranger home, especially one with a baby. He had not invited anyone into his private life in years. Yet somehow, the thought of her standing alone in that freezing night still haunted him. He heard the gentle creak of a door opening. Mia stepped into the kitchen, her hair loosely tied, the baby nestled against her shoulder. The child was sleeping peacefully, his tiny face warm and pink. Ethan turned, unsure what to say. "You can stay as long as you need," he said finally. "The weather is still dangerous." Mia's eyes filled with both gratitude and embarrassment. "I will not stay long. I only needed a place for the night. Thank you for letting us in." Ethan shook his head slightly. "You do not owe me an explanation. You looked like you needed help." She managed a small smile. "I did. More than you know." Ethan gestured toward the table. "There is oatmeal and some fruit. Please, eat. You must be starving." She hesitated, then sat down carefully, balancing the baby in one arm. Her movements were gentle, practiced, the way only a nurse or a mother would know. Ethan noticed the exhaustion etched into her face, the faint purple beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders drooped when she thought no one was watching. After a few quiet moments, he asked softly, "Mia, do you have family nearby?" She shook her head. "No, my parents passed away years ago. It has just been me." "And the baby's father?" Ethan's voice was careful, almost reluctant. Her hand stilled on the spoon. For a second, she seemed to retreat inside herself. Then she looked up, steady but tired. "He is gone. We were not married. He left when he found out I was pregnant." Ethan nodded slowly, his chest tightening at her calm acceptance of something so cruel. "You said you are a nurse?" "Yes," she said, her tone warming slightly. "I worked at St. Clair Memorial Hospital until last week." "Why did you leave?" he asked. Her eyes lowered to her hands. "I did not leave. I was dismissed." Ethan frowned. "For what reason?" "I reported a case of malpractice," she said. "A shipment of counterfeit medication was used on cancer patients. The head nurse told me to ignore it. When I refused, they said I was making trouble." Ethan felt a sharp sting of recognition. St. Clair Memorial was one of the hospitals supplied by Blake Biomedical, his own company. He remained silent, watching her trace circles on the rim of her cup. "I tried to do the right thing," she continued softly. "But when you have no one to stand by you, truth becomes expensive." Her voice trembled, but she kept talking. "After that, I lost my job, my apartment, and the last of my savings went to baby formula. I thought I could make it until next week when my friend in another city promised to help. But last night," she looked down at Noel. "The bus never came, and I did not know where else to go." The room fell quiet again. The only sound was the baby's slow, rhythmic breathing. Ethan leaned against the counter, his jaw tight. He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt too small. Instead, he reached for the kettle and poured hot water into a fresh cup. "You said you told the truth," he said quietly. "That is never wrong." Mia looked up, her eyes meeting his. "It cost me everything." "Then maybe," he said after a pause, "you just have not met the right people to make it worth something yet." "Oh, wait." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand what kind of man he was. The polished kitchen, the tailored shirt, the calm authority, everything about him said wealth and control. Yet there was something else beneath it, a loneliness that mirrored her own. When Noelle stirred and began to cry, Ethan stepped closer without thinking. "May I?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He took the baby carefully, his movements awkward at first, but gentle. The tiny child blinked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Ethan froze. It had been years since he had held a child, years since he had felt something so fragile resting against his chest. Mia smiled faintly. "You are good with him." Ethan exhaled a quiet laugh. I am just trying not to drop him." She laughed softly too, and for a brief moment, the weight in the room lifted. When he handed the baby back, he said, "You do not need to rush to leave. There is plenty of space here. Stay a few days, until you figure things out." Mia hesitated, torn between pride and relief. "I do not want to impose." "You are not," Ethan replied simply. "Consider it temporary shelter." Her eyes softened. "Thank you, Mr. Blake." He nodded once, though inside, something in him had already begun to change. As he watched her carry Noel down the hall, the echo of her words lingered. Truth becomes expensive. He knew that better than anyone. What he did not know yet was that her truth would soon collide with his own, and that collision would change both of their lives forever. Days passed quietly inside the large house. The world outside remained buried under snow, but inside, warmth began to return in small ways. Mia settled into a gentle routine, tending to the baby and helping wherever she could. Ethan often found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared soup, or by the fireplace with Noel asleep in her arms. Her presence filled the empty spaces of the house with something he had not felt in years' life. Every morning, Ethan left early for work. He returned late, exhausted from meetings and reports. Yet lately, he found himself driving a little faster, eager to come home to the sound of that faint lullaby drifting through the hall. It reminded him of the hospital room, where his wife had once lain, the same hospital where no amount of money could save her. That loss had built a wall around his heart, and for 2 long years he had lived behind it. One evening, as he entered the living room, he found Mia sitting by the fire with Noel on her lap. She was reading softly from a worn paperback, her voice low and steady. The baby's tiny fingers curled around the edge of the page as if listening too. Ethan leaned quietly against the doorway. "He seems to enjoy story time," he said with a faint smile. Mia looked up, startled, then smiled back. "He does. I think he likes the sound of my voice more than the story." "Then he has good taste," Ethan said. He stepped closer, the light of the fire painting soft gold across his face. "Do you always read to him at night?" "Every night," she said. "It calms him. It also calms me." Ethan nodded. "I suppose we all need something that helps us sleep." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the crackle of the fire. Then Mia said, "You never talk about your work, Mr. Blake. What do you do?" Ethan paused. He had never lied about his career, but he had not told her the whole truth either. "I manage a medical company," he said carefully. "Mostly research and development." Her eyes lit up slightly. "That sounds meaningful. Saving lives, creating treatments." He looked away. "Something like that." She noticed the shadow cross his face, but did not press. "It must be hard," she said gently, "being responsible for so many people." He gave a small nod. "It is harder when you realize how little control you really have." The way he said it made her heart ache a little. She recognized that kind of pain, the weight of losing someone you could not save. But she said nothing. Instead, she turned her attention back to Noel, brushing his tiny curls with her fingers. The next morning, while cleaning the kitchen, Mia found a small stack of medical journals on the counter. On the top one, the name Blake Biomedical was printed in bold letters. She did not think much of it. To her, it was just another reminder of the world she had left behind. She sighed and turned her focus to the baby monitor on the table, making sure Noel was still asleep. Later that afternoon, she noticed something else: a half-finished meal on the dining table and a forgotten folder beside it. Papers spilled out, filled with graphs, chemical names, and stamped logos. Her hand froze. She recognized one of them. It was the same logo from the counterfeit medication case she had reported at St. Clair Memorial Hospital. Her breath caught. What was a Blake Biomedical file doing in this house? Before she could process the thought, Ethan walked in. Their eyes met, and she quickly gathered the papers into a neat pile. "You forgot this," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Thank you," he replied, sensing her unease. "Those are business documents. I should not have left them there." Mia forced a smile. Of course. After he left, she stood by the window, watching the snow fall again. The truth unsettled her. She did not want to believe the man who had saved her was connected to the company that had ruined her career. But coincidences like that were rare. That evening, while feeding Noel, she spoke softly to herself. Maybe it is just another branch. Maybe he has nothing to do with it. Still, her chest felt tight. Ethan noticed her quietness at dinner. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment. "You have been helping around the house a lot. You should rest." "I like helping," she said. "It makes me feel useful again." Ethan smiled faintly. "You already are." After dinner, Mia cleaned the dishes while Ethan sat near the fireplace with Noel asleep on his chest. The image was almost too tender to look at. For a man who once seemed carved from stone, he held the baby with such care, as if afraid to break the fragile life resting against him. When she finally went to her room, she found herself unable to sleep. The sound of the wind outside reminded her of that first night, cold, uncertain, and full of unanswered questions. She looked down at Noel, sleeping peacefully, and whispered, "We are safe now, right?" But even as she said it, a quiet voice inside her wondered if safety in this house was real, or just another dream that would disappear with the morning light. In his study, Ethan sat alone, staring at the Blake biomedical file on his desk. He could still see the concern in Mia's eyes when she handed it to him. He knew the scandal she had mentioned at St. Clair Memorial. And now, for the first time, he wondered whether the woman he had rescued might be the very nurse his board of directors had worked so hard to silence. The following morning arrived gray, and still, the sky heavy with clouds. Mia was already awake, her thoughts restless from a night without real sleep. She moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing tea, while Noel cooed softly in his crib near the fireplace. The warmth of the flames painted the room gold, but her heart felt uneasy. Every time she saw the Blake Biomedical logo, her pulse quickened. She needed to know the truth. When Ethan came downstairs, he looked tired, his tie loose, his expression distant. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, trying to sound normal. "There is tea on the counter." He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter. "You were up early." "I could not sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." He nodded, studying her. "You have that look in your eyes again," he said gently. "The one that says you are carrying the whole world on your shoulders." She forced a small laugh. Maybe just a small part of it. He wanted to ask more, but his phone buzzed. Ethan glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "I have to take this," he said, stepping into the next room. Mia sat at the table, her hands wrapped around her cup. Through the half-open door, she could hear his voice low, firm, professional. "No more delays," he said. "The investigation must be internal only. I do not want the media involved." Her breath caught. "Investigation?" The words sent a chill down her spine. She did not mean to eavesdrop, but she could not stop listening. When Ethan returned, she quickly looked away. "Work problems?" she asked, pretending to adjust Noel's blanket. "Something like that," he said quietly. "Corporate mess. Nothing you should worry about." "Oh." But Mia could not shake the feeling that it was everything she should worry about. Later that day, Ethan invited her to take a walk outside. The snow had softened into slush, and the air smelled faintly of pine. He pushed the stroller while she walked beside him, bundled in the same coat he had given her that night. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked suddenly. He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "Doing the right thing," she said, "when it costs you everything." He stopped walking. For a long moment, he looked out across the frozen trees before speaking. "No, it does not get easier. But if you stop doing it, you stop being yourself." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She had expected distance, not vulnerability. "You sound like someone who knows that firsthand," she said softly. "I do," he admitted. "I lost someone because I waited too long to make things right." The quiet truth hung between them, heavy and real. That night, when they returned, Ethan received another call. This time he spoke more quietly, but Mia caught a few words that froze her blood. St. Clair, evidence, and the nurse. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. He was talking about her. When he ended the call, she confronted him, her voice trembling. "Ethan, what are you investigating? And why do I keep hearing the name of my hospital?" He froze. "Mia, listen. You knew who I was?" she interrupted. "You knew all along?" "I suspected," he said carefully. "But I wanted to understand before I said anything. Yes, I am the head of Blake Biomedical. The company supplies St. Clair Memorial. I found out about the counterfeit medication, and I have been trying to uncover who was behind it." Mia's hands shook. "Do you have any idea what that place did to me? They called me a liar. They destroyed my career." "I know," he said. "That is why I brought you here. I wanted to make things right." Oh, her eyes filled with tears. "You should have told me. I trusted you. I did not want to hurt you," he said softly. "I only wanted to help." But she stepped back, her voice breaking. "You are part of the same system that ruined lives. Maybe you cannot even see it." Ethan reached out, but she turned away. "Mia, please." She shook her head, holding Noelle close. "No. You saved us once, but you also lied to me. I cannot stay here." Without another word, she walked toward the stairs. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving Ethan standing in the silence, surrounded by the firelight that no longer felt warm. Snow returned that night, soft and endless, blanketing the city in white silence. Ethan sat alone in the living room, the fireplace dying down to embers. The sound of Mia's footsteps, the closing door, and the faint cry of the baby still echoed in his head. He had tried to protect her, but instead, he had confirmed her worst fears. For the first time in years, Ethan felt powerless. He had built an empire, commanded hundreds of employees, and controlled millions of dollars. Yet he could not control the truth that stood between them. The house felt hollow again. Every room reminded him of her laughter, the faint scent of baby powder, the sound of lullabies that had made the silence bearable. The next morning, he went to work early, determined to uncover the truth behind the scandal that had destroyed her life. His secretary handed him a new report. Inside were emails, transactions, and names people he trusted, people who had covered up the counterfeit drug shipments. Anger burned through him. By midday, Ethan met privately with his legal team. "Freeze every related account," he ordered. "Start an internal audit. I want every document traced back to the suppliers." His voice was sharp, decisive. For the first time in a long while, he was not just protecting his company, he was fighting for someone who deserved justice. Meanwhile, Mia stayed in a small motel on the outskirts of town. The baby's fever had returned, and she spent the night sitting by the window, whispering prayers through tears. Despite her anger, her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan, his quiet kindness, the way he had held Noelle, the warmth she had felt in his home. In the early morning light, she looked at her reflection and whispered, "I cannot give up now." She packed her things and went to a community clinic, offering to help as a volunteer nurse. Though exhausted, she poured her energy into caring for others. Each patient she touched reminded her why she had chosen this path to heal, not to hate. Days turned into a week. Ethan called her phone several times, but she never answered. Still, he kept working. At night, he stayed late in his office, studying every file until his eyes blurred. In his drawer, he kept the small blue blanket Mia had left behind, a quiet reminder of the life he was trying to make right. For both of them, healing had begun, but separately, each carrying hope that someday forgiveness would find its way home. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after she had left, Mia received a plain envelope slipped under her motel door. Inside was a letter written in Ethan's firm, steady handwriting. "Mia, I know you have no reason to trust me, but please read this before you decide I am the enemy. You were right. There was a cover-up. The counterfeit medication came from within Blake Biomedical, but not from me. I have evidence that points to Nathan Blake, my half-brother. He has been controlling several of our suppliers behind the scenes. I will not ask you to forgive me, but I will ask you to help me stop him. Without your testimony, the truth will stay buried." Mia read the letter twice, her hands trembling. Nathan Blake. She remembered the name from hospital documents. He had visited St. Clair Memorial several times as a consultant. He was charming, persuasive, and now she understood why no one had dared to accuse him. The following morning, she went to the hospital library to confirm her suspicions. With the help of an old colleague, she accessed archived purchase orders. The dates matched the forged signatures Ethan had mentioned. Every path led back to Nathan. Her pulse quickened as she copied the documents. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Before she could react, 2 men in dark suits appeared. "Miss Collins," one of them said smoothly, "you should not be here." Fear surged through her. "Who sent you?" "Nathan Blake wants a word," the man said. You should come quietly. Mia's heart pounded. She turned and bolted through the side door, clutching the papers to her chest. Snowflakes stung her face as she ran into the night. The men shouted, but she disappeared into the maze of side streets until their voices faded. Shaking, she ducked into a phone booth and dialed Ethan's number. When he answered, breathless relief filled his voice. "Mia, where are you?" "There is no time," she said quickly. "Nathan's men found me. I have proof everything you need. But he knows I have it." "Stay where you are," Ethan said urgently. "I am coming for you." As she hung up, her hands trembled around the phone. The snow kept falling, silent and endless, while in the distance, the sound of tires on wet pavement grew closer. Ethan was already on his way, unaware that this night would change everything. Snow swirled across the dark streets as Ethan's car sped through the city. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his pulse racing. Mia's voice still echoed in his mind. She was in danger, and Nathan knew she had the evidence. He could not lose her, not after everything they had already endured. When he reached the small motel on Riverside Avenue, the parking lot was nearly empty. The front door hung open, swinging in the wind. Inside, the lights flickered. "Mia!" he called, his voice echoing down the narrow hallway. A faint cry answered from the back. He followed it and found her crouched near the stairs, clutching a folder to her chest, her face pale. "Ethan," she whispered, trembling. "They tried to take the files." He knelt beside her, placing a protective arm around her. "You are safe now," he said firmly. "You did the right thing. Give me the folder." She handed it to him with shaking hands. "Nathan will not stop. He wants this destroyed." "Then he will have to come through me first," Ethan said. He helped her to her feet, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and guided her to the car. The baby slept soundly in her arms, unaware of the chaos around them. At dawn, they arrived at Ethan's office building. The guards, recognizing their boss, opened the gates immediately. Inside, the board of directors was already waiting for the emergency meeting he had called. Nathan stood among them, perfectly calm, a faint smile on his lips. "Brother," Nathan said smoothly, "you look tired. Rough night?" Ethan ignored him and placed the folder on the table. "This," he said, "is proof that someone in this room authorized the distribution of counterfeit medication to hospitals across the state." The directors murmured in shock. Nathan's smile faltered slightly. "That is a serious accusation." "I agree," Ethan said coldly, "and the evidence is undeniable." He opened the folder and spread out the papers Mia had risked her life to retrieve: signed contracts, bank transfers, and internal memos. Every document pointed back to Nathan. "You forged my signature," Ethan said. "You used my company to fund your greed. People suffered because of you. Patients died." Nathan's face hardened. "You have no proof those deaths are connected to me." Ethan pressed a button on the remote beside him. The projector screen flickered to life, displaying photos and testimony from doctors and suppliers. "Now I do," Ethan said quietly. The room fell silent. One by one, the directors turned their eyes to Nathan. Within minutes, security officers entered and escorted him away while he shouted, "You think this makes you a hero? You are still part of the same dirty world." When the doors closed, Ethan let out a slow breath, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. Mia stood in the corner, watching everything unfold. She had not spoken since they arrived, her eyes filled with disbelief and quiet relief. Ethan turned to her. "It is over," he said softly. "The truth is out." Mia stepped closer, tears welling in her eyes. "You risked everything for this," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, you did. You are the one who never stopped fighting for what was right." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe we both did." That evening, after hours of police statements and news coverage, Ethan and Mia stood outside the building under the soft glow of streetlights. The storm had finally stopped. For the first time in years, the air felt clear. He looked at her and said quietly, "Come home, Mia. Not because you need shelter, but because that house has not felt alive since you left." She hesitated, then nodded, her voice trembling. "All right, Ethan, let us go home." "Oh." As they walked toward the car, Ethan reached out and gently brushed a snowflake from Noelle's cheek. The baby stirred, then smiled in his sleep, as if the world around him had finally decided to rest. The drive back to the house was quiet, filled with the hum of the heater and the soft breathing of the baby in the back seat. Outside, the snow had melted into a pale mist that lingered over the hills. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was on Mia. She sat beside him, her hands clasped in her lap, staring out the window, as if still unsure this peace was real. When they reached the driveway, the lights from the house spilled warmly across the snow. Ethan turned off the engine and faced her. "You do not have to stay," he said gently, "but I hope you will." Mia looked at him, her expression soft but uncertain. "You already did enough. You cleared my name. You exposed the truth." Ethan shook his head. "Justice is not the same as healing. You gave me both." Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "I did not do it for that." "I know," he said. "That is why it means everything." Inside, the fire crackled again, just as it had the night they first met. The baby stirred and let out a small cry, and Mia instinctively lifted him from the stroller. Ethan stood close, watching her with quiet admiration. The sight of her in his home again made the cold spaces seem alive. Later that evening, they sat together near the fireplace. Noel slept between them, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of a blanket. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was no longer heavy. It was comforting, like a shared breath. Mia broke it first. "When I was hiding in that motel, I kept thinking about what you said, that if you stop doing the right thing, you stop being yourself. I wanted to believe it." Ethan looked at her, his voice low and sincere. "You proved it true, Mia. You reminded me why I started this company in the first place, to save lives, not protect profit." She smiled faintly. "And you reminded me that not all power is cruel." He chuckled softly. "That might be the first time anyone said that about me." Mia's smile grew. "Then maybe you just needed someone to say it." He studied her face, lit by the flickering glow of the fire. There was a gentleness there that he had not seen in anyone since his wife passed away. Not a replacement, but something new, something that made him feel alive again. "Mia," he said quietly, "I cannot promise perfection, but I can promise honesty. No more secrets." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "That is all I ever wanted." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The fire cracked softly, the wind whispered outside, and time slowed until all that existed was the space between them. Ethan reached out and took her hand. It was warm, steady, real. They stayed like that for a long while. Two people who had been broken in different ways, finding peace not through words but through presence. When Mia finally stood, she tucked the baby into a cradle near the fire. "He feels safe here," she said softly. "So do I," Ethan replied. That night, as they walked upstairs, a quiet hope settled between them, a promise that healing did not erase the past, but it could build something stronger from its ashes. For the first time, Ethan believed the future might hold more than just redemption. It might hold love. A year passed quietly, and the city had changed with the seasons. The snow of that long winter was only a memory now, replaced by soft sunlight and blooming gardens. The world had moved on from the scandal at Blake Biomedical. But the mark it left became a symbol of something better. Under Ethan's leadership, the company rebuilt its reputation with transparency, ethics, and compassion. Hospitals across the country began receiving funding for patient care programs and medical scholarships in Mia's name. That morning, the Blake Foundation held its first anniversary event in the garden behind the hospital. A small crowd gathered doctors, nurses, and families whose lives had been touched by the foundation. At the center of it all, Mia stood beside Ethan, her white dress simple yet graceful. In her arms, Noel giggled, now walking and full of life. Ethan took the stage and spoke softly into the microphone. "A year ago, I thought healing meant fixing broken systems. But then I met someone who taught me that healing begins with people with courage, with kindness, and with love." His eyes met Mia's as the crowd applauded. She smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. After the speeches, they walked through the garden together. Near the entrance stood a glass case containing a single item, a dark wool coat. A small plaque beneath it read, "Kindness is the first cure." Mia touched the glass gently. "I still remember that night," she said. "You did not even know my name." Ethan smiled. "I did not need to. I just knew I could not drive away." She looked up at him, the sunlight catching the gold in her hair. "You changed everything." He shook his head. "No, Mia, you did. You reminded me that power means nothing without purpose." They walked toward a small white arch draped in flowers. Guests gathered quietly as the music began to play. It was not a grand wedding, only close friends and a few colleagues, but it felt perfect. When Mia reached the altar, Ethan took her hand and said, "I do not want this to be a promise made in front of others. I want it to be a promise we live every day to protect, to believe, to never stop choosing kindness." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Then that is a promise I can keep." As they exchanged rings, the crowd cheered softly. Noel clapped his small hands, laughing in delight. For the first time in years, Ethan felt completely at peace. Later, as the sun set over the garden, Mia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "Every time I see you, I remember that night at the bus stop. I remember the woman who refused to give up, even when the world turned against her." She smiled. "And I remember the man who stopped when no one else did." They stood there for a moment, watching Noel chase butterflies across the grass. The air smelled of roses and rain, and the world felt new again. As the camera of memory pulled back on that image of a man, a woman, and a child beneath a golden sky, Ethan's voice echoed softly, almost like a prayer. "Love heals the body, but kindness heals the soul." Oh no. And with that truth, their story came full circle, not with perfection, but with peace, with purpose, and with a love that had learned how to stay.